So, from that vantage point, something else became really clear. Real transformation isn't found in just analyzing data, it's found in the people. So, where did I go next?
Welcome to Innovating Education. I'm Dr. Riley Williams, and in each episode, we explore bold ideas and breakthrough strategies shaping the future of teaching and learning. Today's guest is Eleni Soler. Eleni has a vision for classrooms to become spaces where curiosity, agency, and adaptability are not just encouraged, but integrated into how students are taught so that they can thrive in our rapidly changing world. To get there, she equips teachers to lead with creativity, model an entrepreneurial mindset, and invite their learners to do the same. This understanding isn't theoretical, it's rooted in lived experience. Eleni's illustrious career spans education, business, and coaching, giving her a rare view of how workforce needs connect back to K through 12 learning. With multiple master's degrees in business and education, she honed systems thinking and changed leadership in industry. Yet it was her time in the classroom that revealed something deeper. Education is most powerful when it teaches students how to think, not just what to think. Today, as an ICF certified coach and founder of Eleni's Edge LLC, Eleni blends those worlds, partnering with forward thinking leaders and educators to transform classrooms and workplaces into spaces of inquiry and self leadership. Eleni believes cultivating an entrepreneurial mindset is more urgent now than ever as generative AI reshapes work and schooling in real time. Through this lens, Eleni is driven by a deeper question: what kind of learning environment truly prepares young people to thrive in a world that's constantly changing? We're thrilled to have her with us today. Eleni, welcome to the show.
Hi, Riley. So happy to be here. I've been looking forward to our conversation.
Well, for those new to your work, can you share a bit about your journey and what brought you to this intersection of education, entrepreneurship, and coaching?
I just like hearing how that sounds coming out of your mouth, just the blend of my background. I'm so excited to share a little bit about my journey. You could say that entrepreneurial thinking runs in my family. My parents actually immigrated to the United States from Greece, and when I was young, I saw them create their own business, and just there was a lot of determination and hard work and a deep sense of purpose in launching their business. And that early exposure, I remember sitting in the back room with my dad when he would count the the money and deal with the bills and all of those exciting things that business owners do. So I was 9 years old and I found that to be much more excited than eating the cookies. But that early exposure taught me a lot about what it means to create something meaningful from the ground up. So it was really impactful in my formative experience. Later, while I was in college, I watched my sister launch her first business. And that reinforced this idea that possibility lives where vision and effort meet. So I was a first generation college student and college grad. I decided to start out in business. It felt like a natural extension of the world I'd grown up in. But not long into my very typical New York City business career, I was commuting on the Metro North, I was working in Midtown. I sensed right away that there was something missing. I needed my work to matter, not just the bottom line, but to people. I couldn't name it then because I was so young and I was just trying to figure out life a little bit, but I was searching for work that made a difference both for the individual and the greater system that they're part of. So that's actually what pulled me toward education. I started in the K 12 classroom where I experienced the real daily challenges of teachers that they're experiencing every day, as well as the beauty of helping young learners make those meaningful connections in those light bulb moments. And from there, I moved into teaching adult learners who were reading at a fifth grade reading level and trying to get their GED and their high school equivalency diploma. And that's when I fell in love with the adult learner. There's something special about the adult learner that just ignited for me. So I shifted into higher ed and I found my way supporting future teachers who were preparing to lead the classrooms of their very own. Through every step, one question kept echoing. How can we make learning more meaningful? Not just for those academic outcomes, which is important, but to help people step into their full potential, because that's really what I was hoping to accomplish. So that question eventually brought me back to business, this time behind the scenes as a data analyst at first, using data to improve the student experience. I ended up transitioning to managing a team of data analysts, and that's when I got this 100,000-foot view of the system, really zoomed out to see what it looked like from that high vantage point, and it helped me fully embrace what I'd known all along. I'm a big picture systems thinker. I love spotting patterns, connecting the dots, and designing pathways that make change not just possible, but sustainable using a continuous improvement approach. So, from that vantage point, something else became really clear. Real transformation isn't found in just analyzing data, it's found in the people. So, where did I go next? If you want to help people, become a coach. That's what led me to coaching. Coaching gave language to what I've always sensed. Growth happens when people feel seen, supported, and empowered to lead from within. So at this point, you're probably wondering where entrepreneurship fits in. I did what I always do. I decided to follow my gut and I launched my first business, Eleni's Edge LLC. From the outside, it might look like, wow, Eleni's taking yet another detour in her professional career. But for me, that path has always been clear. I don't tend to think or move in straight lines. I like to say that my ideas in my mind follow these loops and these curves, and sometimes I'm jumping S curves. So I'm the kind of person, just to give you a little context, who intentionally takes a different route home from the grocery store. I'll go a different way. Which way can I go now? Just so I can see what I might discover on the way. So my business brings together everything I've ever gathered in my professional journey: education, business, analytics, and now coaching. And it's kind of melding it into something new. And the best part is that it's still evolving. It's very exciting.
And that's the thing about systems. We often think of them as linear, but the way you described it is more accurate in how things actually work. There are curves, there are twists, there are multiple factors that we have to take into account as we're moving towards a solution. So, what I'd like to do is to begin by grounding us in your perspective. How do you define a future ready leader in education?
That's a great question. So for me, a future ready leader, when I think of the future, I'm definitely thinking of this constant change. And as a result, it needs to be someone who embraces change. I like to say you don't have to embrace change and say, "Oh, I'm so excited that this change is happening." You may not like change, but can you be curious about the change? Can you face it with courage? So that's what I say. A future ready leader is someone who can embrace that change with that curiosity and that courage lens. They're adaptable, they're resourceful, they're willing to rethink traditional approaches to meet the needs of learners in this rapidly evolving world. I don't like to say, "Oh, but that's the way it's always been done," as an answer to why we do things, right? Well, why do we do it? And does it still matter? So beyond adaptability, these type of leaders must lead with intention. They have to cultivate an environment where students and teachers are feeling empowered to take risks, to ask questions, not be afraid to fail, and to innovate together. So, to me, a future ready leader must model this entrepreneurial mindset. They encourage agency, creativity. They're not just managing a classroom, they're nurturing future leaders, helping every student develop the skills and confidence to thrive amid uncertainty and complexity. In business, there's this term that we use. It's called VUCA. I don't know if you've ever heard, or for your listeners who may not have heard it. It stands for volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity. That's our modern world. We're living in a world that's VUCA. This is the world that our students need to be equipped to thrive in. And that's what a future ready leader is capable of doing.
You've worked extensively with entrepreneurial leaders outside of education. So, can we bridge that? What lessons from that world should inform how we develop young learners in schools?
Yes. So it's interesting because I worked with entrepreneurial thinkers both before and after I entered the education field. So it's kind of always been there informing my perspective. And what I see a lot with entrepreneurial thinkers is that comfort with that ambiguity and uncertainty. They're making decisions all the time without having all the information. Sometimes they only have, let's say, 60% of the information, and they're able to move forward with that. And instead of fearing failure, because they're making decisions with less than the information, they're likely going to fail. But instead of fearing it, they see it as an opportunity, a chance to just learn and grow and do better next time. Entrepreneurs are constantly iterating. They're testing ideas and they're learning from that, what we call quote unquote failure. I really want to put in quotes because they don't see it as a failure. They see all of these things as opportunities for learning and growing. So it's always a win. It's less about knowing the right answer and more about being curious and persistent in figuring things out. That mindset is something I believe our students really need. And another big thing is self agency. Entrepreneurial thinkers take initiative. They fully own their work. They're like mini owners. That's why in some organizations you might hear the term intrapreneurs, because they're bringing that entrepreneurial mindset, but they're working inside someone else's company because they act like mini owners over whatever process they're overseeing. They're driven by intrinsic motivation, not just external rewards. Because honestly, entrepreneurs, they have a lot more failures than they do wins. So something has to be driving them, and it can't be this external outside because the failures are going to shut them down. So they're intrinsically motivated. They have a vision inside that just keeps driving them. So if we can help students develop that same inner drive and ownership, I believe they'll become more confident and engaged learners. Entrepreneurial thinkers also talk about solutions rather than the problem. So, yes, they're solving problems, but when they hit a roadblock, their conversations and thinking revolve around what they should be doing next rather than like getting stuck just dwelling on the problem. That's crucial shift in teaching students how to think. You move from problem talk to solution talk, is how I like to say it. So, really, if I was going to sum it up, it's about helping young people get really comfortable with uncertainty because that's the world they live in. It's going to be uncertain. So, we have to be able to trust the process, right? They have to learn to act even without perfect information. They have to embrace a mindset that's focused on solutions and build that internal motivation and responsibility for their own learning journey.
Now, you've said that entrepreneurial thinking isn't just about startups, it's about how our students approach uncertainty, take initiative, and iterate their ideas. What does that mindset look like in action in a classroom setting?
People who launch businesses don't have the monopoly on entrepreneurial thinking. It's actually about how anyone approaches challenges, uncertainty, and creativity, no matter what they do. It's a mindset, not a market. That's what I say we want to help our students develop. So, one tool I use to support this is this entrepreneurial mindset profile or EMP assessment. It's a research backed, strengths based assessment tool that breaks entrepreneurial mindset down into 14 scales. There's 7 personality based scales and 7 skills based scales. And in the classroom setting, I think 4 of these scales really stand out that I'd like to just touch on. So, the first one is idea generation, the second one is risk acceptance, the third one is self confidence, and the fourth one is execution. So when I put these together, I like to think about it as the courage to try and the confidence to create. Idea generation is showing up when a student is exploring the possibilities instead of settling for one right answer. That's getting ideas, right? And then when they're practicing that risk acceptance, they're more willing to try something new, even if that idea might fail. That's the courage part, right? They're needing to come up with ideas and accept the risk of not having a good idea. That's that courage to try. And then these other 2 skills, the self confidence inside them is what's going to allow them to trust their voice, right? Hey, I can trust myself on this. And then execution, that's an important skill. It's about bringing those ideas to life, not just talking about them. And that's the confidence to create part.
And that really is a culture shift, a mindset shift that we need to take, right? Because we've trained our students that there's a right answer and there's a wrong answer. Whenever that's the case, we don't take risks, right?
Yes. And we're not here to talk about my perspective on how we test and assess students, but I will say there's alternative answers. There might be a true right answer, but sometimes there can be an alternative answer. And if we're open to that alternative response, I think that we create space for more risk taking in the classroom.
Now, historically, you've spoken about the need to rethink classroom practices in light of how students can be best prepared for today's world. So, before we dig into the specifics, how can any new strategies such as inquiry based learning, coaching inspired teaching, or using generative AI as a thought partner be introduced in a way that honors existing classroom structures and educator workload?
Well, this is important. I'm so glad you asked this question. One thing I'm always mindful of is the huge workload that's upon teachers. They carry so much and they do it. Really, they should be paid a lot more than they're getting. So I'm always mindful of what they're carrying. I've been in the role of a teacher. A lot of my things that I did for my students always came out of my own pocket to be able to do it because there was just no funding to support the students' learning. So when we talk about new strategies, or when I do, whether it's this inquiry based or coaching inspired, I'm not asking them to do more. I definitely don't want to ask them. They're already doing so much. What I like to say is doing what they're already doing, but just doing it a little differently. So for me, the key is starting with those small shifts. For example, a teacher can shift from giving the answer after asking the question to asking a more open ended question. Or another way, they can reframe how they respond to student ideas to invite more exploration instead of evaluation. These don't require throwing out the curriculum. It just invites us to work with it a little differently. And when it comes to things like generative AI, to me, the goal isn't to master it. It's a tool and it's going to take time, and don't want them to feel intimidated or like I have to know it right now. It's a great opportunity right now for teachers to alongside learn with their students, to experiment with AI, reflect on their learnings, and invite students into that same mindset of curiosity and iteration. Because when teachers feel like they have permission to try rather than pressure to perfect, that's when meaningful change starts to feel doable in the classroom.
Let's talk inquiry based learning.
Okay.
The position of teachers as a lead learner rather than an expert. So, what shifts in posture, practice, and planning do you see as most essential for leaders to truly make that move?
So before we talk about the shifts in posture, practice, and planning, I'd like to share about an impactful book that really impacted me as a teacher. And it was an idea that came from Parker Palmer's book, The Courage to Teach. I had the absolute honor to be required to read this when I was going for my master's in education, and I'm so glad I read it starting out as a new teacher. There's so many great things. I actually have taught teachers in New York State through the principles in this book, and I can't go into all of them today. But one basic idea that I think I'd like to touch on, it's about this idea of the three voices in the classroom. Most of us think there's two voices, right? The teacher and the student. But in Palmer's work, he talks about a third voice, the subject itself, right? So he gives this image in a traditional setup. You have content, the subject, teacher, and then in the middle, and then students are below the underneath as the amateurs learning. So the content becomes this object that's something to be delivered or managed, tested to, right? But here's the thing. An object isn't available for a relationship. A subject is. So when a teacher holds the center, students are actually cut off from that direct connection with the subject. And then learning becomes transactional. Now, what we've tried to do is correct it by elevating the student voice in a student centered classroom. And that's great. It's great for engagement. Students are centered, we're centering it around their interest. But if everything revolves around students' current interests, we risk losing that depth that we need or avoiding those tough, complex ideas that actually help them grow. So the solution that Palmer presents in his book is this idea of a subject centered classroom that puts the content, living, dynamic, worth exploring, at the very center of the classroom. And in this classroom, the teacher and the students are gathering around the subject. They're listening to what it has to reveal to them. Here, the teacher now becomes a lead learner, and Parker calls it a guiding knower. They're modeling that curiosity and inviting students to uncover the subject together. So, getting back to your original question about how this shift will happen in posture, practice, and planning, well, in posture, it's about moving from expert to co learner. In this classroom, You're going to hear a teacher saying things like, I'm wondering about, or let's test this together. Even, I don't know, let's find out. That kind of posture models both curiosity and humility for their students. In practice, it means shifting from covering content to what I like to say, uncovering it. That could look like asking open ended questions, encouraging multiple perspectives, trying small experiments, or engaging in peer dialogue. Anything that gives students direct access to the subject to uncover it. For them, it's the first time they're ever being exposed to it. Granted, many people before them have already learned it and mastered it. For that individual student, this is their first time encountering it. They are the pioneer, they are the learners. So give them that space to have that same discovery that whoever came up with the Pythagorean theorem felt when they discovered it. In planning, it's not about throwing structure out the window. I hope that's not what's coming across. It's about creating learning pathways that allow for that exploration. So in this space, teachers are still guiding, but the goal isn't to control the learning. It's to be able to open it up and be okay with that uncertainty that it's going to veer off of your lesson plan and be willing to just go with that. Because when a classroom is structured in this way, it becomes a living, breathing, learning community. Learning shifts from being transactional to being relational. And students aren't just picking up facts, they're practicing what I said earlier, the courage to try and the confidence to create, the very heart of an entrepreneurial mindset.
Wow. So you encourage teachers to adopt coaching practices in the classroom. What does it sound like when a teacher moves from directed teaching to holding space in student led discovery? Can you give us a tangible example?
This is a big question, and there's a lot that comes along with it. So let's unpack it a little bit. So, when a teacher steps into a coaching mindset, the very first shift they need to make is how they see their students. They need to see them as whole, capable humans who can actually arrive at their own solutions if they're given the right scaffolds and supports. Okay? Then, once they've shifted and how they see their students, the next shift is in how they see the learning process itself. Instead of this directing learning, they begin to hold space for student led discovery. So it becomes less about giving answers and more about guiding the thinking process. That shows up in how they speak, how they listen, how the teacher even waits. Because in this space, silence now becomes a tool, not a gap. Questions become invitations, not checkpoints. So a teacher who's using a coaching approach is comfortable letting a question just sit, right? Give it space, let it breathe. People need time to think, right? Silence isn't a failure of instruction, it's that space for thinking. So that means hearing a teacher say, take a minute to wrestle with that on your own. I'll wait. In my training, I was taught to have wait 5 seconds. I've actually encouraged people to wait 10 seconds, teachers, before they respond when asking a student a question. Sometimes you can even stretch that even longer. We really start off as a 3 second wait. I really feel some students need more time to think because that pause is giving them permission to process before anyone starts speaking up. So you feel like you have to rush to the answer and then you don't have time to really even process and think the answer on your own. So in this classroom, solitude is honored and it's also surrounded by community. So after a moment of self reflection that allows all students to process, and even those fast processors can be writing down their thoughts already, where others are still thinking through. Then the students can come together in pairs or small groups, testing their thinking in a safer space instead of a big, scary classroom and all your peers are listening to your response. And then in that space, the teacher is now circulating, listening, and asking follow up questions, curious, but not corrective questions. So I'd like to say if you're using a coaching inspired approach, questions are replacing answers. Instead of, here's the definition, you're going to hear things like this. What patterns are you noticing? How might we test that idea? What would happen if? And when a student asks something that the teacher doesn't know, the response should be this. That's a great question. I don't know either. Let's find out together. That vulnerability is going to model lifelong learning. So all that to say, you asked for a tangible example, right? So I want to give that to you, but I had to give you this lead in because coaching is just, there's so much that coaching can bring into the classroom. And it would just be another tool for the teacher. They don't have to only coach. That coaching would just be a tool they would use when necessary and when there's space for it in a lesson. So here's an example. Let's say students are working through a multi-step word problem in math. Hey, I came from business. I like numbers. I'm going to use a math example. In a more traditional setup, the teacher might say, okay, let's follow our process, underline the numbers, let's decide what operation to use, what were the key words. Subtraction, great. Next, we'll solve using this formula. It's clear, it's structured, but it doesn't leave much room for student thinking. Now, let's redo this same scenario with a coaching inspired approach. It's going to sound a little different. The teacher might actually open up with, what do you notice about this problem? And give space for the students to just curiously state. They can say, oh, I see words, I see numbers. Like, it doesn't have to be a setup what the expected answer is. Teachers should be open to the students just noticing. Instead of giving the steps, the teacher now becomes a thinking partner. They might say, is there more than one way to approach this? Or if a student says, I think I can do that in two different steps, they might say, what makes you think this could be to take two steps? And if a student is getting stuck, which they will, instead of jumping into the rescue, it's actually holding space a little bit, let them wrestle, and that's okay. And then the teacher might ask, where do you feel stuck if they see them as stuck? And then ask them, what do you think can help you get unstuck? That's teaching a child agency. Well, I can go to my textbook. My textbook might have to answer. I can ask a friend. I can go to you. It gives them the opportunity to figure out and access their resources. So this posture is modeling curiosity, and that practice is going to build trust in that student's thinking. They're gaining metacognitive awareness, they're articulating their strategies, and they're more willing to take risks because in here, the process is being supported and celebrated, not just the answer. And when students start hearing that kind of language, how would you test that idea? You're going to feel the shift in the classroom because they're going to start showing up differently. There's more ownership. Curiosity is actually being allowed. That's where entrepreneurial mindset can take root in the classroom.
I am so glad that you used a math example because I'm listening and I'm like, okay, I can see this working in English. I can see this working in history. I can even see this working in, say, a chemistry lab. But math is just something I've always thought of as I'm going to tell you the steps and you're going to memorize them. So that is amazing. That was the perfect example.
Can I
But
add in to that?
yeah, absolutely.
Okay. So I didn't share this in my intro, but I did home educate my son for a little while. So I had fun experimenting with his education as well. It was the ultimate dream to be able to create a curriculum and not have to go through all of the steps of the system to get it to be used in the classroom. And when we did math, one thing I'd always tell him, I would put a number on the board. I remember when he was in fourth grade, and I'd say, "Okay, what's happening?" I said, "I know there's a number that's sitting there on the board, right? They see this number." And I said, but what else is happening to that number? We would talk about this whole world around that number. And he would know that there's like anytime we wanted to, we can pull it out. There's a decimal point right after it. After that decimal point, there's a bunch of zeros. There's also a bunch of zeros we can put in front of that number. It's a fraction. It can go over one. There's an exponent. You can put it to the one exponent. There were so many things that we talked about that's happening with the number that it's not just this number. There's this world that's happening, and we created the story around it, and it really ignited his passion and love for math. And I think, yes, at the end of the day, 4 plus 4 is 8. But how much more enriching can it be when we're talking about this whole world around that number 4 that could be happening at every given moment? Because 4.0 plus 4.0 is also 8, right? And 4 over 1 plus 4 over 1 is also 8. And are they wrong? No, they're just alternative responses. So I just wanted to add that.
Well, I'd also like to dig into generative AI. We often frame this as a threat to originality, but you've spoken about how you see it as a tool for student ideation. What does responsible creative AI use look like in a classroom? And how can our leaders support teachers in modeling that relationship well?
This is a can of worms question, and I definitely get I get why people are concerned about this topic. I do. There's this idea that if students use generative AI, that they're going to stop thinking for themselves, right? But I actually have this different perspective. If you can't tell, I think differently by now. If we use it well, generative AI can actually help students think more deeply, not less. So hear me out. To me, there's this opportunity now to shift how we teach. I'm going to go through a writing example for this one, okay? So I use math over there, I'm going to use writing now. There's an opportunity for teachers to reclaim the brainstorming phase, whether that's any subject, but in writing, brainstorming comes to mind. That's that early ideation stage where you're just trying to get something down to explore possibilities. That stage doesn't get nearly enough time in the classroom right now. So, what if we decided creative thinking becomes more of a center of the writing process instead of the rush to get to that polished product? Because that's what AI can do. AI can polish it better for us. What if we spent more time focusing on creative thinking? So, like, let's imagine this, right? Your student comes to the class. This is how I see it playing out. They don't have a finished draft, they don't even have a draft. They just have a spark of an idea. So you start your writing lesson and it's something they've been thinking about. So you have them actually sit in the classroom. You create space for them to sit with that idea, come up with ways to get them ignited and help them get inspired. So they have this blank paper. Maybe you're doing free writing or whatever you might do for the tool for that creative writing portion. Then you have them go home, take their ideas, actually go to whatever generative AI tool your school district is using, and then have a conversation with it, right? They're going to prompt the AI, but you're going to have them have the AI also ask them questions back to get them thinking a little bit more deeply about what they wrote. Now, the AI is a thinking partner, helping them explore these new angles, strengthening their reasoning and uncovering what's still fuzzy. So now they print out their conversation that they had with the AI, they bring it to the classroom with their notes and what the AI exchanges, and now they're going to write their first draft right there in the room. We're not going to have them do the first draft at home. The first draft is down there. So you're seeing for yourself that they're actually doing the core writing, right? They're doing the hard work. Now you have them go home and do the revision process again with AI. This time they're going to be focused on refining and clarifying their ideas. So what's great is that now they have this second conversation that they can include with their final piece. It becomes part of their journey to that final essay, showing how they use AI not to do the work for them, but to help them stretch and strengthen their ideas. And for those school leaders that listen to your podcast, this is where they come in. The key is not just saying, okay, we're going to use AI, that's what we need to bring into our classroom. It's modeling what responsible creative use looks like. This is just one idea that I presented. That means training teachers to actually explore it themselves, letting them use it to do their lesson plans, encouraging them to have this space where they're taking the curriculum, figuring out what they want to do, but then going to AI to kind of help them, ask them questions. So let them try it, let them play. And they can bring those discoveries into the classroom. And it's not a tech tool, it becomes a thinking tool. And tools that, when we use wisely, can actually deepen student learning.
I couldn't agree more. So, when these strategies that we've talked about work in concert, they can fundamentally reorient the student experience. What safeguards or structures are needed so that this empowerment doesn't slide into chaos or inequity?
Oh, this question right here is gold, Riley. It's so important because when we talk about empowering students, right, we're giving them more voice, we're giving them more choice, we're giving them more freedom. It can sound like we're just like handing over the reins and hoping for the best, right? But the truth is, empowerment without structure isn't freedom, it's chaos. So I love inquiry based learning. I love using coaching voice in the classroom, and generative AI, I think, should have a place in the classroom. And when they come together, something really powerful happens. Students are seeing themselves as thinkers, creators, and problem solving. But to make this shift sustainable and equitable, those guardrails definitely need to be in place. I'm going to go back to Parker Palmer, his book, The Courage to Teach. It was such a great book. One way to do this in the classroom is to live in paradox. It's something that Parker Palmer speaks to so beautifully in his book, The Courage to Teach, that there are three that I find especially helpful to create these guardrails. The first paradox is that the classroom should be both bounded and open. I know this sounds weird, how it'll work in practice, but basically, a classroom needs clear boundaries that give students a starting point. They also need room for exploration, where students can ask their own question and pursue ideas that matter to them. So you might have an anchor text that's used, so they don't get to use whatever text they want. So that's the bounded part, but the outcome of how they get there can be a little bit more open. A second paradox that can help with these guardrails is creating a classroom that's both hospitable and charged. So students need to feel this hospitable part is feeling emotionally safe, and they need to be intellectually challenged. That's the charged part. So that means giving them routines like regular check ins or low stakes warm ups, as well as an invitation to wrestle with those complex ideas. Doing this will create a space that says to a student, you belong here, and we believe you're capable to do great things. And the third is individual and group voice, making space for both. Empowerment works best when students feel personal voice matters and that they're part of something bigger. So in this case, I talked a little bit about this earlier. You'll have maybe like a think, pair, share and reflective prompts to support that individual voice, and then come back to the group so that the group voice is coming through in the shared discussion, maybe Socratic dialogue, where ideas are built collaboratively. So when we hold space for these paradoxes with care, we create classrooms that are structured enough to feel safe and open enough for deep creative learning to take root. That's how we keep student agency from becoming chaos and how we build classrooms for the future.
Wow. Okay, this has been a really heavy, really intense episode. So, what is, if you could boil it down, one key takeaway that you hope our school leaders walk away with from today's conversation?
I would like to say, before we get into the one thing, that it may seem heavy and intense because it's a lot of information that's seeing things differently, but it actually makes the workload very light. It's a very light workload because the teachers are no longer having to be the experts. Students are now getting agency and they're actually contributing to the classroom environment, and the teacher's load will lighten if they incorporate inquiry based learning and a coaching approach and using Gen AI instead of fighting it. So it may feel intense if this is your first time encountering these ideas, but if you just start with that one small shift, you'll see a lighter load for yourself. So it does lead to lightness. That's what I'd like to just say. But the one thing I hope school leaders or educators are taking from this conversation, that real learning is relational. That's really what I want. It's about people. When students and teachers are learning in relationship with themselves, right? Not just with each other, but with themselves, also with each other, student to student, teacher to student to teacher, right? Because the teacher is learning from the students here. And with that subject, the subject has now as a voice, something really amazing happens. They're not absorbing information anymore. They're asking better questions. They're thinking more deeply. They're navigating uncertainty with curiosity and care. The teacher is no longer the one with the expert. They're the ones who are modeling how to think for their students. They're cultivating that entrepreneurial mindset so that when they go out into the workforce, they're prepared not just to respond to the change, but to shape it with confidence in their thinking. In the world that's moving fast, we don't just need students who can keep up. We need students who can help create what's next. So if you're a school leader or an educator listening, don't overhaul your whole system. That's not what we're saying. And I hope that you're not getting that. I want to encourage you just to start by asking yourself, where in your classrooms are students invited to think for themselves? Because that's where transformation is going to begin.
Wow. Okay, so for our listeners who want to learn more about your work, whether it's coaching, speaking, or consulting, where's the best place for them to connect with you?
I'd say the best way, I like to keep it simple, is through email. So they can reach me at Eleni, Eleni, at elenisedge.com. I also share insights on my LinkedIn. So Eleni Soler, feel free to follow me there on ongoing conversations about education, entrepreneurial mindset, coaching, and leadership. And if they want to explore my offerings, they can go to my website at elenisedge.com. But I'd like to say, if they're curious about their own entrepreneurial mindset, I'd like to offer a special just for your podcast listeners, Riley. So it's a package that'll include the full entrepreneurial mindset profile assessment, plus a full coaching session with me, normally valued at $200. I'll give it to your podcast listeners, limited time for $100. If they're interested, I just want to put that out there. They can email me, just mention that they heard it here on your podcast.
That's amazing. Thank you so much. I know our listeners are going to appreciate that. You know, the insight, the clarity, the creative thinking that you'd shared today is just mind blowing. You know, from transforming leadership practices to reimagining student agency through entrepreneurial mindsets. Your work calls us to lead with both vision and intentionality. So thank you so much for that. And thank you again for being on this podcast.
It was such an honor and a pleasure. I'm so grateful that I had this time to just meet with you and chat and have conversation about something I just love, how to help students be have greater self-agency in their world.
Well, for our listeners, I'm going to link all of the information that we talked about at the end of this episode in the description. And we are proud to be supported by the Solvia Learning Group, whose commitment to advancing education makes conversations like these possible. So if today's episode sparked ideas or helped reframe your thinking, please be sure to subscribe, leave us a review, and share it with a colleague. And before we go, if you're a school or district leader looking to strengthen your crisis readiness, please check out my new professional development course for administrators, A Peer-Led Journey to Building a Continuity of Operations Plan. It's now available through Circles at getcircles.org. It's practical, it's collaborative, and it's designed to help you plan for disruption while sustaining student success. So until next time, keep innovating, keep inspiring, and keep making a difference.